Well, welcome to class. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 26. We're going to be starting our pilgrimage in the participles. Years ago, I used to tell students that this was the hardest part of Greek. Participles, certainly for most people, cause the greatest amount of consternation of all parts of learning Greek. But it was really interesting. The last couple of years that I taught Greek, I got to the end of the participles and I asked the students, okay, was this hard? And they go, no, no big deal at all. So I think we figured out how to teach participles and make it so it's not quite so hard. Now, having said that, though, it is really important that you get caught up on everything. So I have the same message now that I had for you back in chapter 15. What's going to happen in participles is that we're going to take the noun system and the verb system, and in one sense, we're going to merge them together, all right? We're going to stick them together. And so, noun system, that's a piece of cake now. But if you're not caught up with your verbs, it can get a little frustrating to do this. So I would say it is important to really get caught up on your verbs. But other than that, you'll need to work at the participles. You'll have to think about them. But they shouldn't cause you a great amount of problem, okay? What I did was I broke up the discussion of participles into multiple chapters. In chapter 26, this chapter, I'm going to cover almost all of the grammar of the participles. In other words, in terms of the meaning of the participles and the theory behind the participles, it's all in this chapter. Chapters 27 through 30 then only have to do with the form of the participle. And the participles are all built on tense stems that we're used to. They all use case endings that we're used to. So I'm going to be putting things together perhaps in ways you're not used to, but there's nothing really new to learn there in terms of form. Well, maybe a little something, but same tenses, same case endings. So in this is the important chapter is what I'm trying to say. This is the chapter where we're going to really make sure we understand in theory what a participle is, how they get put together, and what they mean. And after that, it's just a matter of dotting I's and crossing T's, okay? All right. I'm going to be showing you some different forms of Greek participles in this chapter. Don't feel any need to memorize these, okay? They're simply there for illustration, and so don't worry about trying to memorize the forms. Just enjoy learning the grammar and the theory behind participles, okay? All right. English first. In English, participles are ing words: eating, sleeping, sitting, flunking, passing. Now, technically in English, you have participles and gerunds, and participles are adjectival and gerunds are noun. But in Greek, you don't have that distinction. So what I do when I talk about participles, even in English, I just say participles are ing words, okay? And so we'll let the purists deal with gerunds later on. Participles are ing words. Their technical definition is that they are verbal adjectives. Now, if you hear anything in this class, that's what I want you to hear. Participles are verbal adjectives. And if you can get through that, over that hurdle, this chapter is simple. For me, when I was learning participles, this is what was hard for me. I could, well, how can you have a verb and have it be an adjective? How can you have a present tense form and a genitive singular case ending? And I had conceptual problems putting that together. Once I figured out that participles are verbal adjectives, everything else became easy when it came to participles, okay? So that's the main thing I want you to see. Let me give you a couple of examples and talk about some of the grammar. And here I'm mostly in English, but I'm thinking ahead to Greek as well. If I gave you a sentence like, while eating, my Greek teacher gave us the final. Okay? While eating, my Greek teacher gave us the final. Eating is the participle, right? It's the ing form. Who is doing the eating? Is it the teacher or is it us? Well, in English grammar, and this is important, that's answered by proximity. The noun that's closest to the participle is doing the action of the participle. Or to state it the other way, the participle is modifying the closest noun. So when it's while eating, my Greek teacher gave us. Teacher is closer to eating than us. So it's the teacher who's doing the eating, okay? Now, that's important because in Greek, proximity doesn't mean much of anything. Okay, and we're going to use case, number, and gender to link a participle back to the word that is doing the action of the participle, the word that the participle is modifying, okay? But in English, it's proximity. So while eating, my Greek teacher gave us the final. And you can kind of feel in that example, eating, that it's the verbal side of the participle is being stressed, right? Now, the eating does modify something. It's teacher, so that's the adjectival side. But contextually, while eating is telling you something primarily about the giving, right? What was going on when the teacher gave us? Well, he was eating. When he was eating, it was while he was eating that he gave us the test. Okay, so contextually, you can feel the participle is, in terms of meaning, is modifying the verb. And technically, it's modifying the noun, but you get the idea. It's adverbial in its force, okay? Well, we can have another example where you can feel more the adjectival nature of the participle. If I said something like, the woman sitting by the window is my Greek teacher. Okay, the woman sitting by the window is my Greek teacher. Sitting is your participle. And who's doing the sitting? Well, the woman is. And see, the participle sitting is simply giving you an attribute. It's just an adjective, right? It's just giving you an attribute of the woman. The woman. Well, which woman? The woman sitting by the window. Okay, that woman is my Greek teacher. Okay, so there you can kind of feel more of the adjectival side of the participle. So participles are ing words. They are verbal adjectives, okay? The other phrase, the grammatical term that you need to know is the phrase participial phrase. Participial phrase refers to the participle and everything that goes with it. This is really important in translation because when you see a participle, you need to identify the beginning and the end of the participial phrase, okay? And, draw your lines through and keep it separate. So the participial phrase is the participle in anything that modifies it, a direct object, an adverb, a prepositional phrase, whatever it is, okay? So that's basically what's going on in English. Okay, let's switch over into Greek. And the definition for a participle in Greek is the same basic definition. In Greek, a participle is a verbal adjective. Because it is verbal, it's going to be built on a verb, and it's going to have tense, present, aorist, and perfect, and it's going to have voice, active, middle, passive, and deponent, all right? Now, thankfully, participles don't have any personal endings, which is nice. You can get rid of those. But because a participle is a verbal adjective, it's going to have tense, and it's going to have voice, okay? But a participle is also a verbal adjective, and as an adjective, it has to modify something. And how does a participle link itself to a noun? Well, how does an adjective link itself to a noun? Case, number, and gender, right? Yeah, the participle will agree with the noun that it's modifying in case, number, and gender. And that linkage tells you who's actually doing the action of the participle. That's what's nice about it, okay? And again, like I said, when I was learning Greek, it was strange to put tense and case together, but you just got to get over it. Okay, let it just sleep on it. It'll make sense tomorrow for you, I would think. At its most basic level, this is what participles are, okay? They are ing words, and you're gonna look at them, and you're going to see the verb, and you're going to see what it modifies. You're going to put an ing on it, and its most basic level, that's what you have. That's pretty good, isn't it? All right? So, basics of Greek definition of participle is a verbal adjective. Now, I said that participles are built on verbs. Let me talk a little bit about how, in general, participles are formed. And I'm going to give you some illustrations, and I think you're going to be able to figure out what it is without me telling you a whole lot, to tell you a little something, but let me show you what I mean. The basic way a participle is formed is that it starts with a tense stem of a verb. So participles are built on a verb, and to that verb is added what's called the participial morpheme. Now, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a word. So like a personal ending is a morpheme, or a case ending is a morpheme, okay? Well, we actually have morphemes. They're 2 or 3 letters long, and it's the actual thing that says, hey, this verb is a participle, all right? So it's the participial morpheme. And then thirdly, onto the end of the participial morpheme is the case endings. So that, at its most basic level, is how we put participles together. Verb, participial morpheme, case ending. Now let me show you a couple of examples. Let's just kind of figure this out on our own, okay? Let's say you saw the form Lou on tests. What is it? Well, it's obviously from Louisville, right? The fact that I highlighted in yellow gives it away a little, but yeah, this is Louisville, okay? Well, there's Lou, so you know that much. The omicron is a connecting vowel that sometimes you just like in the indicative system, it's hard to pronounce, to go from to pronounce the verb going right into the tense to the participial morpheme. So they stick a connecting vowel in there, but that's no big deal. The new tau is actually one of the two active morphemes, active participial morphemes. There's basically a couple of active morphemes and then one passive morpheme, all right? So you have Lou, you have a connecting vowel, then you have the active morpheme, participial morpheme, and then you have your case ending. So tell me what this is. Well, what tense do you think it is? Well, there's nothing that's going to put it into the aorist or the perfect, right? So this is a present, and because new tau is the active morpheme, you know that this is a present active participle. Case number and gender, nominative plural masculine, right? It's from Louisville, and what would be its inflected meaning? Well, loosing. There, see, that's not hard, is it? See, again, I'm especially concerned for any of you who have heard about participles, or especially if you had taken a course with a different textbook, you can come into participles with some fear. But it's not that hard, is it? Okay, let's take another word and let's pull it apart and see what it is. Pistiusantes. Okay, what is this? Well, it's obviously from pistule, right? There's the pistiu. But then you have a sigma alpha. What does that normally tell you? Well, it normally tells you you're in the aorist, aren't you? And pistule has a first aorist, so it's a sigma alpha. But what's missing if this is an aorist? There's no augment. Okay, now here's the important rule. Once you're out of the indicative system, so this applies to participles and infinitives, imperatives, and the other stuff we have to learn in BBG still. Once you're outside of the indicative system, time almost ceases to exist. In other words, the verbal constructions don't, except at one technical level, they don't care at all about time. They only care about aspect. Okay, that's really, in terms of meaning, that's a really important thing. The participial system is built on aspect, all right? And we're going to have a continuous participle, we're going to have an undefined participle, and we're going to have a completed participle, all right? What does the augment indicate in the indicative? It indicates time, doesn't it? It indicates past time. So if you're going to form an aorist participle, you got to get rid of the augment. See, it just makes sense, doesn't it? So pistiu is from pistule. The sa tells you this is an aorist participle. No augment because there's no time in the non-indicative verbal systems. The new tau tells you it's an active, and epsilon sigma, again, is the case ending. So what is pistiusantes? Well, it's an aorist active participle, nominative plural masculine from pistule, meaning believing. See, it's not hard, isn't it? Okay, let's take one more. Pipoiekates. What's that? Well, it's from poieo, isn't it? Yeah. And so you have the lengthening epsilon to an eta before the tense formative. You have reduplication, don't you? Okay, then there's the kappa. So it looks like you're in the perfect. Now, it's a little different because you're used to kappa alpha as a tense formative, right? Well, kappa alpha is a tense formative for the perfect in the indicative. The simple kappa by itself is a tense formative for the perfect in the participles, okay? So this is a perfect participle. Now, the thing you don't know is that omicron tau is the other active participle morpheme, okay? It's the morpheme that's used for the perfect or the completed participle. So what is this? Well, it's a perfect active participle. It is a nominative plural masculine from poieo, and it means, well, making, doing, or having made, having done, something like that. We'll fine-tune that a bit. But doing, making, okay, that's a simple way to translate it. So that's in essence what goes on with the formation of the participles. That's not hard, is it? So very good, very good. Okay, let's talk about aspect because in terms of meaning, other than the actual meaning of the verb itself, the issue of aspect is what participles are all about, okay? Outside of the indicative system, any notion of time almost completely goes away. In the advanced information, in one of these chapters, I'll tell you that there is a little bit of significance with time, but that's advanced information. Non-indicative verbal system is all about aspect, all right? And we have, in essence, three aspects, don't we? We have continuous, we have undefined, and we have completed. Now, knowing what you know, how do you think we are going to form the the continuous participle? How do we form the continuous participle? We form it with a present tense stem, all right? So the continuous participle is built on a present tense stem. Okay, if you wanted to have the undefined participle, what tense stem are you going to form it on? Well, it's going to be formed on an unaugmented aorist, isn't it? All right. And if you wanted to have a completed aspect participle, what tense stem are you going to use? You're going to use the perfect. Okay. Now, most people call these the present participle, the aorist participle, and the perfect participle. And I can understand why. It helps you understand how the participle is actually formed, all right? But I don't like that nomenclature because it's too easy for a first-year student to think that a present participle indicates an action occurring in present time, and it doesn't, all right? That has almost nothing to do with the meaning of the participle. So I have suggested that we change nomenclature. I don't know if teachers are picking it up or not, but the continuous participle is built off the present tense stem and indicates a continuous ongoing action. The undefined participle is built on an unaugmented aorist tense stem and it indicates an undefined action. And the completed participle is built on the perfect tense stem and it indicates a completed action, an action that was completed with ongoing consequences. All right. So that's the basic genius of the participial system in Greek. Okay. Important chart, important grid to get down. Okay, let's talk a little bit about translating. And as you might guess, because a participle is a verbal adjective, there's two basic uses of the participle, and therefore there's two basic ways to translate it. Now, I guess I should say up front, there's one simple way to translate a participle. Stick an ing on it. Okay? I mean, what you can do is you translate in the Greek, you see the participle, you see what the verb is, you stick an ing on it, and it may be rough English, but you can get through the sentence. Now, if you want to fine-tune that a bit, you may need to come back and reevaluate, is the thrust on this participle on its verbal aspect or on its adjectival nature, I should say. And those are the two basic ways to translate participles. Ing is the simple, and if this is a hard chapter for you, just say, I'm just going to use ing for now, okay? All right. But in terms of fine-tuning your translation a bit, you will find that a participle can be emphasizing its verbal nature or its adjectival nature. And if it's emphasizing its verbal nature, you'll normally end up with an ing form that functions in English kind of like an adverbial phrase or clause or something. If you had, for example, while studying for his Greek exam, Ian fell asleep. See, the participle is studying, and if this were in Greek, the while would be an adverb. But there you're pressing the adverbial nature of the participle. Ian is an old student of mine and a good friend, but he didn't necessarily fall asleep, but he got into this illustration. All right. Ian fell asleep. What was he doing when he fell asleep? Well, he was studying for his exam. You can feel the adverbial nature. But you can also sometimes feel more the adjectival nature. And so you could say, the book lying open on the windowsill belongs to Kathy. Kathy's Ian's wife, and also one of my students. They met in Greek class. But that's another story. Anyway, the book lying on the windowsill. See, lying, there's your participle. And when the adjectival nature of the participle is being stressed, again, you can just use the ing form, but you may eventually want to turn it into some kind of relative clause or something. The book that is lying on the windowsill, or which is, or something like that. But again, the basic way to translate a participle is stick an ing on it. And what you're going to find, though, that is if it's functioning more adverbially, the ing is going to work great. If it's functioning more adjectivally, you may want to turn it into some kind of relative clause or something, okay? All right. Now, I should say that the form of the participle doesn't change, all right? There's not one form of the participle if it's adverbial and another form of the participle if it's more adjectival. It's exactly the same form. This is just a distinction of context and what fits the sentence you're translating, okay? All right. Okay, let's move back a bit to formation issues, and I just want to make sure that some of this is clear. Participles are verbal adjectives. Let's talk about the verbal side. Because they're verbal adjectives, they're going to have tense. And so we're going to have participles that are present and aorist or perfect. Okay, in other words, we're going to have participles that are stressing a continuous aspect or an undefined aspect or the completed aspect. They will be built on the present and on the unaugmented aorist and on the perfect tense stems. All right, so you have luantes, there's your present, lusantes, there's your undefined or your aorist, and lelucates, there's your completed or your perfect, okay? So on the verbal side of a participle, they're going to have tense. And also on the verbal side of the participle, they're going to have voice. In other words, a participle can be active, middle, passive, or deponent. And the way of Greek is going to distinguish active from passive, let's say, is that there's going to be different participle morphemes, okay? The nu tau and the omicron tau are active participle morphemes, men, mu epsilon nu, and then you're going to, because it's going to be second or first declension form, you need a vowel at the end, so mena or mene. That's going to be how you indicate a passive participle, okay? So you have a kuon test. That nu tau tells you that this is a present active participle. But if you came across a form, a kuamenoi, that men, or the mena, I guess actually, would be telling you that this is a middle passive participle. When it comes to the issue of deponency, remember that deponency is an issue of tense stem, not anything else. And so if a verb, it's certainly not an issue of whether it's an indicative or non-indicative. So if you have a verb like erchomai, you know that it's deponent in the present. That means it's going to be present. It's going to be deponent in the present indicative. It's going to be deponent in the present participle. Okay. So if you come across the form erchomenoi, okay, there's the men that tells you that it's a participle, and so you're going to see this as a present. But it's from erchomai, so this is a present deponent participle, nominative plural masculine. Okay. From erchomai, meaning coming or going. So that's the verbal side, the tense and the voice. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Switching over to the adjectival side, what's going to determine the case number and gender of a participle? And again, this isn't new grammar. This is old grammar reapplied in a new situation. So you don't make this hard. What determines the case number and gender of any adjective? The word it modifies, right? Okay, so what determines the case number and gender of a participle? The word it modifies. Now remember, in English, it's an issue of proximity. But in Greek, it's going to be an issue of the case ending that's being used, whether it's nominative or accusative, whether it's singular, plural, masculine, feminine. All those are the linkage methods that Greek uses to connect a participle to the word that it's modifying. Now, again, what's nice about this is that linkage tells you who's doing the action of the participle. All right. Now, okay, having said that, and that's the difference between English and Greek. Think of the sentence, the man eating the chocolate cake is my brother. What would be the case number and gender of eating? Well, it would be the word that it's modifying. What word is eating modify if this were in Greek? What would be modifying man? Well, man is anthropos, so it's singular masculine. And in the sentence, man is the subject, so it's nominative. So, how would you determine the case number and gender of the participle eating? Well, since anthropos, man, is going to be nominative singular masculine, then the participle eating has to be nominative singular masculine. So they're verbal adjectives. That's what you have to remember. Okay, let me change the illustration a bit. If he saw the man studying koine. Okay, he saw the man studying koine. What's going to be the case number and gender of studying? Well, it's going to go back to man, so it's going to be masculine singular again. But in this illustration, man is the direct object, And so the participle studying has to be in the accusative, right? Because man's going to be in the accusative. So again, just think adjectives. It'll all make sense. Now, one of the things that a participle doesn't have is a subject. In fact, outside the indicative system, verbs don't have subjects. But because of the case number and gender linkage, you can see the word that the participle is modifying. Well, that tells you who's doing the action of the participle. Again, assuming the participle is an active participle. So that linkage, in essence, tells you the subject. But it's not technically the subject, but it's telling you who's doing the action of the participle, okay? So if you had the sentence, he saw her while studying, okay, in English, it's the her who's doing the studying. But in Greek, if you said he saw her while studying, studying could be masculine, telling you that it's the he that's doing it. And so while technically he is not the subject of the participle studying, it's he who's doing the action of the participle. It's he who's doing the studying. Okay? Catch all that? All right. Okay. Hey, we're almost done. So hopefully you're not too overwhelmed by this. Odds and ends. Odds and ends number one is that Greek participles take modifiers, okay? They can take direct objects. They can take adverbs. They can take prepositional phrase. They can take lots of different things to fill out the meaning of the participle. And so when it comes to translating participles, you put your arms around the participial phrase, a slash before the participle, a slash at the end of all the modifiers, and you view that as a unit, okay? That's really important to do. Really important to do that with participles, because in Greek, participial phrases can get pretty long. I mean, the writers can keep adding on modifiers, so you really want to get into that habit of doing that. Second odds and end has to do with negation. The basic rule is this. We use u, omicron upsilon, to negate an indicative verb, okay? But outside of the indicative system, the negation is may, mu eta. Okay, so if we're going to say not studying, it's going to be may. And this will hold true for all the other non-indicative moods, okay? Imperatives and infinitives and whatnot. So the negation of participles is may, not oo. And that actually is a really cool hint. You'll be reading along and you may not recognize that something's a participle, but you're going to see a may and you go, uh-oh, what's a may doing there? There's got to be a non-indicative form somewhere around here. And you go looking for your participle, okay? So that's a very important clue. Thirdly, in terms of parsing, and you've already done this with me, there's 8 things that you're going to tell your teacher when you parse a participle. And my recommendation is to start on the left side of the participle with its verbal characteristics, and then go to the right side of the participle and cover its adjectival characteristics. Your teacher may want you to do it a different way, but that's how I do it, and that's how it's laid out in the workbook. So it's not that nice and neat, but that's basically what I'm doing. Okay, so you see a participle, and you're going to want to know what its tense is, and then you're going to want to know what its voice is. And then the next slot is actually the mood slot, and participles are not technically moods, but that's where you say participle. And then it's case number, gender, lexical form, and then the meaning of the inflected form, okay? So you have ukuantas, okay? What is that? Well, that is, it's from akuo. The new tau tells you it's active. You can see you're in the present tense system. So this is a present or a continuous active participle. It is a genitive singular, either masculine or neuter, from akuo, meaning hearing, okay? So that's how you parse these things. Well, how was that? How are you doing? That's all there is to the chapter. That's all there is actually to the grammar for all of participles. In chapter 27, we're going to look at continuous or present participles used adverbially. In chapter 28, we're going to look at undefined or aorist participles used adverbially. In chapter 29, we're going to look at participles being used adjectivally. And in chapter 30, we're going to look at perfect participles or completed participles. Again, those are all issues of form. And in this chapter, we got all the meaning, significance, and translation down. Pretty good, huh? All right. So you should feel pretty comfortable with yourself if you've gotten this far, okay? Good. Well, let's go to the summary and make sure this is all clear. Participles are ing words. End of the chapter. Well, not quite. Participles are verbal adjectives. Because they are verbal adjectives, they have tense, present, aorist, and perfect, and they have voice, active, middle, passive, and deponent. But participles are also verbal adjectives, and so they have case, number, and gender. The primary significance of a participle is its aspect. The continuous participle is built on the present tense stem and indicates a continuous action. The undefined participle is built on an unaugmented aorist tense stem and indicates an undefined action. And the completed participle is built on the perfect tense stem and indicates a completed action that has present consequences. In terms of the basic formation of the participle, they're formed with a verb and then the participle morpheme, sometimes with a connecting vowel between them, and then case endings. And as far as odds and ends are concerned, participles can have modifiers. They're negated by may. And when you parse them, you tell the teacher 8 things about them. Tense, voice, that it's a participle, case, number, gender, lexical form, and inflected meaning. Okay, there you go. It wasn't too hard, was it? And that's all the grammar you really need to know for 5 complete chapters, okay? Now, there's no vocabulary for this chapter, so you get a break today and go get a little extra sleep or something. But just when you go to sleep tonight, just tell yourself 2 things. Participles are ing words. They are verbal adjectives. They have tense and voice, they're built on a tense stem of a verb, and they have case, number, and gender. There you go. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.